Volume 2, Part 14 of Herodotus' Histories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Histories, Volume 2, by Herodotus of Halicarnassus, translated by E.D. Godley. Volume 2, Part 14. This was the end of Aristagoras, after he had brought about the Ionian revolt. Histiaeus, the tyrant of Miletus, arrived in Sardis after he was let go by Darius. When he came there from Susa, Artaphernes, the governor of Sardis, asked him for what reason he supposed the Ionians had rebelled. Histiaeus said that he did not know, and marveled at what had happened, pretending to have no knowledge of the present troubles. But Artaphernes saw that he dissembled, and knowing the exact story of the revolt, said, "I will tell you, Histiaeus, the truth of this business. It was you who stitched the shoe, and Aristagoras who put it on." Thus spoke Artaphernes regarding the revolt. Histiaeus was frightened by Artaphernes' understanding of the matter and fled the next night to the sea, for he had deceived Darius by promising to subdue Sardo, the greatest of the islands, while secretly intending to make himself leader of the Ionians in their war against Darius. Crossing over to Chios, he was taken and bound by the Chians, because they judged him to have been sent by Darius to make trouble for them. But when they learned the whole story of his hostility to the king, they set him free. Then Histiaeus was asked by the Ionians why he had so zealously ordered Aristagoras to revolt from the king, and done the Ionians such great harm. He did not at all reveal the true reason to them, telling them instead that King Darius had planned to remove the Phoenicians and settle them in Ionia, and the Ionians in Phoenicia. For this reason, he said, he had sent the order. The king had made no such plan, but Histiaeus wanted to frighten the Ionians. Then Histiaeus, using Hermippus, a man of Artaneus, as messenger, sent letters to the Persians at Sardis, because they had previously talked with him about revolt. But Hermippus did not give the letters to the men whom he was sent, and went and delivered them to Artaphernes instead. Artaphernes, learning all that was afoot, bade Hermippus carry Histiaeus' letters to those for whom he was bringing them, and give them those which the Persians sent in answer to Histiaeus. Thus these men became known, and then Artaphernes put many Persians to death. So troubles arose in Sardis. Since he failed in his hope, the Chians brought Histiaeus back to Miletus at his own request. But the Milesians were glad enough to be rid of Aristagoras himself, and they had no wish to receive another tyrant into their country now that they had tasted freedom. When Histiaeus tried to force his way into Miletus by night, he was wounded in the thigh by a Milesian. Since he was thrust out from his own city, he went back to Chios. When he could not persuade the Chians to give him ships, he then crossed over to Miletus and persuaded the Lesbians to give him ships. They manned 8 triremes, and sailed with Histiaeus to Byzantium. There they encamped and seized all the ships that were sailing out of the Euxine, except when the crews consented to serve Histiaeus. Such were the doings of Histiaeus and the Miletians. Against Miletus itself a great fleet and army were expected, for the Persian generals had joined their power together and made one army, which they led against Miletus, taking less account of their other fortresses. Of the fleet, the Phoenicians were the most eager to fight, and there came with them to the war the newly subdued Cyprians, and the Cilicians and Egyptians. These were coming to attack Miletus and the rest of Ionia. When the Ionians learned of it, they sent deputies to take counsel for them in the Panionium. When they came to that place and consulted, they resolved not to collect a land army to meet the Persians, but to leave the Milesians to defend their walls themselves, and to man their fleet to the last ship, and gather as quickly as possible at Lade to fight for Miletus at sea. This Lade is a small island lying off the coast of Miletus. The Ionians then came there with their ships manned, and with them the Aeolians who dwell in Lesbos. This was their order of battle. The Milesians themselves had the eastern wing, bringing 80 ships. Next to them were the Prinaeans with 12 ships, and the Maetians with 3. Next to the Maetians were the Tians with 17 ships. Next to these the Chians with 100. Near these in the line were the Erythraeans, bringing 8 ships, and the Phocaeans with 3. And next to these the Lesbians with 70. Last of all in the line were the Samians, holding the western wing with 60 ships. The total number of all these together was 353 triremes. These were the Ionian ships. the ships of the foreigners were 600. When these two reached the Milesian shore, and all their land power was present, the Persian generals, learning the number of the Ionian ships, feared they would be too weak to overcome the Greeks. If they did not have a mastery of the sea, they would not be able to take Miletus, and would be in danger of some evil treatment by Darius. With this in mind, they gathered the tyrants of the Ionians who had been deposed from their governments by Aristagoras of Miletus, and had fled to the Medes, and who now were with the army that was led against Miletus. They gathered as many of these men as were with them, and said to them, Men of Ionia, let each one of you now show that he has done good service to the king's house. Let each one of you try to separate your own countrymen from the rest of the allied power. Set this promise before them: they will suffer no harm for their rebellion, neither their temples nor their houses will be burnt, nor will they in any way be treated more violently than before. But if they will not do so and are set on fighting, then utter a threat that will restrain them. If they are defeated in battle, they will be enslaved. We will make eunuchs of their boys, and carry their maidens captive to Bactra, and hand over their land to others. So they spoke. The Ionian tyrants sent their messages by night, each to his own countrymen. But the Ionians to whom these messages came were stubborn and would have no part of the treachery, each thinking that the Persians made this offer to them alone. This happened immediately after the Persians arrived at Miletus. Then the Ionians who had gathered at Lad held assemblies. Among those whom I suppose to have addressed them was Dionysius, the Phocian general, who spoke thus: Our affairs, men of Ionia, stand on the edge of a razor, whether to be free men or slaves, and runaway slaves at that. If you now consent to endure hardships, you will have toil for the present time, but it will be in your power to overcome your enemies and gain your freedom. But if you will be weak and disorderly, I see nothing that can save you from paying the penalty to the king for your rebellion. Believe me and entrust yourself to me. I promise you that, if the gods deal fairly with us, either our enemies shall not meet us in battle, or if they do, they shall be utterly vanquished. When the Ionians heard this, they put themselves in Dionysius's hands. He then each day put out to sea with ships in column, using the rowers to pierce each other's line of ships, and arming the fighting men on board. For the rest of that day he kept the fleet at anchor. All day he made the Ionians work. For 7 days they obeyed him and did his bidding, but on the next day, untried as they were in such labor and worn out by hard work in the sun, the Ionians began to say to each other, Against what god have we sinned that we have to fulfill this task? We have lost our minds and launched out into folly, committing ourselves into the hands of this Phocian braggart, who brings but 3 ships, and having got us he afflicts us with afflictions incurable. Many of us have fallen sick already, and many are likely to suffer the same thing. Instead of these ills, it would be better for us to suffer anything, and endure this coming slavery, whatever it will be, rather than be oppressed by that which is now upon us. Come, let us obey him no longer. So they spoke, and from then on no man would obey. As if they were an army, they raised tents on the island where they stayed in the shade, and they were unwilling to embark upon their ships or continue their exercises. When the generals of the Samians learned what the Ionians were doing, they recalled that message which Aetius, son of Salosan, had already sent them at the Persians' bidding, entreating them to desert the Ionian alliance. Seeing great disorder on the Ionian side, they consented to the message. Moreover, it seemed impossible to them to overcome the king's power, and they were well assured that if they overcame Darius's present fleet, another one 5 times as large would come. Therefore, as soon as they saw the Ionians refusing to be useful, they took up that for a pretext, considering it advantageous to save their own temples and houses. This Aetius, from whom they received the message, was the son of Silosan the son of Aetius, and had been tyrant of Samos until he was deposed from his rule by Aristagoras of Miletus, just like the other Ionian tyrants. Now when the Phoenician fleet came sailing against them, the Ionians put out to sea against them with their ships in column. When they drew near and met each other in battle, which of the Ionians were brave men or cowards then in that sea fight I cannot exactly say, for they all blame each other. The Samians are said, according to their agreement with Acis, to have raised their sails and gone off to Samos, leaving their post, all except 11 ships. The captains of these stood their ground and fought, disobeying their admirals. For this deed the Samian people granted that their names and patrimonies should be engraved on a pillar as brave men. This pillar now stands in their marketplace. But the Lesbians, seeing their neighbors fleeing, did the same as the Samians, and most of the Ionians did likewise. The most roughly handled of those